In the electrifying pulse of New York City during the late 1890s, where the air carried the mingled scents of coal smoke from locomotives and fresh-baked bread from corner bakeries, Alexander Harrington navigated the opulent world of America's Gilded Age elite with the precision of a master chess player. As the Duke of Ashford, a title bestowed upon his family through distant British roots that had entangled with American soil via vast land grants in upstate New York following the Revolutionary War, Alexander was the epitome of unattainable allure. At 35, with his tall, broad-shouldered frame clad in impeccably tailored suits from Savile Row, imported across the Atlantic, he embodied a rare fusion of old-world nobility and new-world ambition. His dark hair, always neatly combed, framed a face chiseled by resolve, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess rather than admire. Society's most eligible women, daughters of robber barons and shipping magnates, competed fiercely for even a fleeting glance from him at the grand soirees that lit up Fifth Avenue like stars in a man-made constellation. Yet Alexander remained utterly immune to the charms that ensnared lesser men. His heart, armoured by the early loss of his parents in a tragic carriage accident on the foggy roads of England, beat only for the steady rhythm of business and legacy. The city's transformation was Alexander's backdrop and his domain. Skyscrapers clawed toward the heavens, their iron skeletons rising amid the clamour of riveters and the ceaseless honk of horse-drawn omnibuses jostling for space on cobblestone streets. He owned shares in the very railroads that snaked across the continent, connecting bustling ports like New York to the untamed frontiers of the West. Mornings found him in smoke-filled boardrooms at the New York Stock Exchange, where men in pinstripe vests shouted bids under the vaulted ceilings adorned with murals of commerce's triumphs. There, Alexander negotiated mergers with a cool detachment, his voice measured and authoritative, turning potential rivals into allies with promises of shared prosperity. "Profit is the only currency that endures," he often remarked to his advisers, a cadre of sharp-minded lawyers and accountants who managed his estates from the Hudson Valley to the steel mills of Pennsylvania. His immunity to love was no mere rumor. It was a fortress built from necessity. After his parents' death, he had been shuttled across the ocean to relatives in America, inheriting not just titles, but the weight of maintaining a lineage in a republic that scorned aristocracy. Women saw in him a prize, a duke in a land without kings, but he viewed them as fleeting distractions, their flirtations as calculated as his own investments. Evenings brought the social whirl that Alexander endured rather than enjoyed. The mansions along the Upper East Side, with their grand facades of limestone and wrought-iron gates, hosted balls that drew the cream of society. Gas lamps flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting warm glows over polished parquet floors, where couples waltzed to the strains of Strauss, played by orchestras hidden behind potted palms. Ladies in corseted gowns of imported silk rustled like autumn leaves, their fans fluttering signals of interest toward the Duke. He would arrive fashionably late, exchanging pleasantries with hostesses like Mrs. Astor, the arbiter of New York's social hierarchy, who eyed him with maternal calculation. "Your Grace, when will you settle on a suitable match?" she might inquire over a glass of champagne imported from France. Alexander's response was always a polite deflection, his smile never reaching his eyes. He danced the obligatory quadrilles, his steps flawless from years of private tutors, but his mind wandered to the ledgers awaiting him at his Madison Avenue townhouse, a stately brownstone with bow windows overlooking the bustle of carriage traffic and newsboys hawking the latest editions of the New York Times. It was at one such event, a lavish ball in a Gramercy Park mansion inspired by the opulence of the Vanderbilts, that the unyielding Duke's world tilted on its axis. The autumn air outside carried a crisp bite, leaves swirling in eddies along the gaslit streets where vendors sold roasted chestnuts to theatre-goers spilling from Broadway shows. Inside, The grand hall buzzed with over 300 guests, the air thick with perfumes of rose and jasmine mingling with the faint tang of cigar smoke from adjoining salons. Alexander stood near a marble-columned alcove, nursing a brandy, when his gaze was drawn across the room to a cluster of intellectuals gathered around a refreshment table laden with silver platters of oysters on ice and delicate pastries. There, amid the swirl of taffeta and laughter, was Eliza Thorne, a young woman of 28 from a modest Boston lineage, her presence as unadorned as a wildflower in a garden of hothouse blooms. Her dark auburn hair was pinned in a simple chignon, a few tendrils escaping to frame her heart-shaped face, and her gown of soft green muslin spoke of practicality rather than extravagance. She was not of the inner circle. Her family had risen through scholarly pursuits, her father a professor of literature at Harvard before his passing, leaving Eliza to support her widowed mother through tutoring and occasional writing for ladies' journals. Eliza's laughter rang out, genuine and unforced, as she debated the merits of emerging women's suffrage with a group that included suffragettes like Elizabeth Cady Stanton in spirit, if not in person. Her hazel eyes sparkled with conviction, her hands gesturing animatedly as she quoted from Mill's The Subjection of Women, arguing for education as the key to equality in this rapidly industrializing nation. Alexander, who had intended to slip away early, found himself rooted in place. In that one look, across the sea of powdered shoulders and jeweled necks, something stirred, a flicker of warmth in the cold vault of his chest. It was not the calculated admiration he inspired, but a profound recognition of her authenticity amid the artifice. For the first time in years, the Duke felt seen, not as a title, but as a man. As the orchestra struck up a lively polka, he excused himself from a conversation with a steel tycoon's daughter and made his way toward her, the crowd parting like waves before a ship's prow. Their introduction came through a mutual acquaintance, a bespectacled professor who beamed at the unlikely pairing. "Miss Thorne, allow me to present His Grace, the Duke of Ashford." Eliza turned, her expression shifting from surprise to polite curiosity, extending a gloved hand. "A pleasure, Your Grace," she said, her Boston accent crisp yet warm, carrying the cadence of New England winters. Alexander took her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, unyielding like her gaze. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Thorne. I couldn't help overhearing your thoughts on suffrage, refreshing in a room full of convention." They fell into conversation effortlessly, the din of the ball fading as she shared her experiences volunteering at settlement houses in the city's tenements, where Irish and Italian immigrants crowded into narrow apartments, their dreams clashing with the harsh realities of factory work. Alexander, drawn in, spoke of his own ventures, how railroads could bridge not just distances but divides, offering opportunities to the working class. Hours passed unnoticed. When the clock chimed midnight, signaling the event's wind down, he offered to see her to her carriage. Outside, the cool night air carried the distant rumble of elevated trains, and as she stepped into the handsome cab, Eliza paused. "Thank you for the discourse, Duke. It's rare to find someone who listens." With that, she was gone, leaving Alexander standing on the sidewalk, the city's nocturnal symphony swirling around him, his immunity to love cracked by the light of her unassuming spirit. The days that followed were a torment of uncharacteristic distraction. Alexander threw himself into work with renewed vigor, riding the elevated railway to inspect construction sites where workers in denim overalls hammered beams under the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge, a marvel of engineering that symbolized America's bold leap forward. Yet in quiet moments, sipping coffee in his study lined with oak-paneled walls and shelves of first-edition classics, Eliza's face haunted him. He made discreet inquiries through his network, learning of her life. Born in Boston's Beacon Hill, educated at a progressive girls' academy, now residing in a modest brownstone in Greenwich Village with her mother, where they hosted salons on literature and reform. Her writings, published pseudonymously in Harper's Bazaar, advocated for women's rights without the shrillness that alienated many. This knowledge only deepened the intrigue. She was no social climber, but a force of quiet revolution in a world still bound by corsets and conventions. As November's chill deepened, turning the Hudson River's edges to frost, Alexander attended another gathering, a literary dinner at Delmonico's, the famed restaurant with its mirrored walls and menus boasting terrapin soup and canvasback duck. There, fate conspired again. Eliza was among the guests, invited for her insights on transatlantic literature. Seated across from him at a table draped in white damask, they resumed their dialogue, now laced with personal revelations. She confessed the pressures of her position, supporting her mother while pursuing her passions, the subtle judgments from those who saw her unmarried status as a flaw. Alexander, in turn, alluded to the loneliness of his title, the way it isolated him even in crowds. By evening's end, as they stepped into the bustling streets alive with the clip-clop of horses and the calls of lamplighters, he felt the crack widen into a chasm. Love, that elusive spectre he had dismissed, had arrived unbidden, threatening to upend the ordered empire he had built. Winter's grip tightened on New York City as December ushered in a flurry of snow that blanketed the parks and muffled the ceaseless energy of the streets. Alexander Harrington, Duke of Ashford, awoke each morning in his Madison Avenue residence to the sound of coal scuttles being emptied into basement furnaces, the warmth seeping through vents to chase away the frost-etching patterns on window panes. His routine was unyielding. A breakfast of poached eggs and toast in the dining room, overlooking the avenue where fashionable ladies in muffs and gentlemen in overcoats hurried to their appointments. But since that fateful ball, Eliza Thorne occupied his thoughts like a persistent melody from a popular operetta playing at the Metropolitan Opera House. He rationalized it as curiosity, nothing more, a brief diversion from the empire he commanded. Yet in board meetings at his Wall Street offices, where maps of rail lines sprawled across mahogany tables and cigar smoke curled toward stained-glass skylights, his mind wandered to her hazel eyes and the way her voice rose with passion for the underprivileged. The city's winter social season was in full swing, a whirlwind of charity bazaars and holiday galas that filled the society pages of the New York Herald with sketches of fur-clad attendees. Alexander attended out of obligation, his presence ensuring invitations for his business associates. One such event was a fundraiser for the Children's Aid Society at the Waldorf Astoria, the hotel's newly opened grandeur with its marble lobby and electric elevators, drawing the elite to bid on artworks and heirlooms. The ballroom, aglow with thousands of lights strung like diamonds, hummed with the chatter of philanthropists and socialites. Alexander arrived in a tuxedo of midnight velvet, his arrival announced with a flourish that turned heads. He scanned the room idly, steeling himself against the expectant smiles when he spotted her. Eliza, in a gown of deep blue velvet that hugged her figure modestly, standing near a display of rare books donated for auction. She was there representing a women's literacy program, her table surrounded by volumes on history and poetry, each sale funding classes for factory girls in the garment districts of the Lower East Side. Their eyes met across the polished expanse, and Alexander felt that same pull, stronger now, like the tug of the East River's current. Excusing himself from a cluster of admirers, he approached, his heart pounding in a way foreign to his composed demeanor. "Miss Thorne, what a delightful surprise! Are these the tomes that fuel your advocacy?" Eliza looked up, a genuine smile breaking across her face, softening the lines of fatigue from her volunteer work. "Duke Harrington, indeed they are. Knowledge is the great equalizer, don't you think? In a city like this, where fortunes rise and fall with the tides, education can steady the ship." They launched into discussion, the auction's gavel calls fading as she described the immigrants she aided, families from Eastern Europe huddled in frigid tenements, their children scavenging for coal scraps amid snowdrifts. Alexander shared tales of his rail expansions, how new lines to Chicago promised jobs but often exploited laborers, prompting him to consider fairer wages. For the first time, he spoke not as a duke, but as a man grappling with the moral complexities of progress. As the evening progressed, they wandered to a quieter alcove overlooking the hotel's courtyard, where snowflakes danced under lantern light. Eliza opened up about her life, the Boston winters of her youth, skating on the Charles River with her siblings before tragedy claimed her father, leaving her to navigate a world that valued marriage over intellect. "I refuse to be a footnote in someone else's story," she said, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. Alexander nodded, revealing fragments of his own isolation, the pressure of his title in a nation that revered self-made men like Carnegie, yet eyed inherited nobility with suspicion. "Titles bind as much as they elevate," he admitted, the words tasting of confession. Bidders clamored around them, but in that moment the world narrowed to two souls, bridging divides of class and expectation. When the auction concluded with a flourish of applause, Alexander offered his arm for the coat room, where valets bustled with fur wraps and opera cloaks. Outside, the streets glittered with fresh snow, horse cars sliding on rails as theatre crowds dispersed. He hailed a cab for her, but before she entered, he pressed a small donation for her cause into her hand, a check substantial enough to fund a month's classes. The gesture marked a shift. Alexander's days blurred into a haze of longing. He traveled by private Pullman car to Philadelphia for negotiations with textile barons, the landscape outside whipping by in whites and grays, rolling hills dusted with snow, villages huddled against the cold. In the car's oak-paneled lounge, sipping whiskey by a coal stove, he penned a letter to Eliza, formal yet revealing, discussing a book on social reform she had mentioned. Back in New York, responses arrived like lifelines, her script elegant and forthright, challenging his views on labor rights while sharing anecdotes of her mother's embroidery circle in the village. The city's winter deepened. Ice skaters twirled on Central Park ponds, vendors hawked hot mulled cider from carts, and Christmas trees twinkled in shop windows along Broadway. Alexander found excuses to visit the settlement houses, donating anonymously at first, then openly, drawn by glimpses of Eliza teaching English to wide-eyed children in drafty halls heated by pot-belly stoves. Society's whispers began, of course. At a New Year's Eve ball in a Riverside Drive mansion, where fireworks burst over the Hudson like golden blooms, Alexander danced with Eliza, their first waltz, her hand light in his, the music swelling around them. Envious glances followed. Debutantes like the Vanderbilt heiress pouted from the sidelines, while matrons speculated in powder rooms about the Duke's sudden interest in a blue stocking. Eliza felt the scrutiny, confiding later over tea in a quiet Fifth Avenue cafe, its windows steamed from the warmth within. "They see me as an interloper," she said, stirring her cup. Alexander reached across the linen tablecloth, his fingers brushing hers. "Let them. You've shown me a world beyond ledgers." But doubt lingered. His advisers warned of alliances lost, while her mother fretted over propriety in a boarding-house parlor filled with lace doilies and family portraits. As January's blizzards howled, confining the city under snowbanks shoveled by Irish laborers, Alexander wrestled with the change Eliza wrought, a whisper growing to a roar, challenging his immunity and reshaping his path. Spring thawed New York's winter stranglehold in March, coaxing green shoots from Central Park soil and filling the air with the chirp of robins and the scent of blooming lilacs. Alexander Harrington, the once unyielding Duke of Ashford, found his thoughts blooming similarly, centered on Eliza Thorne. His Hudson Valley estate, Ashford Manor, a sprawling Victorian pile of fieldstone and gables transported in spirit from English moors, but adapted to American expanses with wide verandas and stables for thoroughbreds, beckoned as the ideal setting for their next encounter. He sent an invitation via courier on horseback, the missive sealed with his crest, proposing a luncheon to discuss collaborative philanthropy. In truth, it was a pretext. The pull toward her had evolved into a need, disrupting his meticulously planned days. Eliza arrived by steamer from the city, the Hudson's waters choppy under a pale sun, her travelling ensemble of wool skirt and blouse practical for the journey. The manor grounds unfolded before her, manicured lawns rolling to the river's edge, where willows trailed branches in the current, and gardeners in straw hats tended flower beds, bursting with tulips and daffodils. Alexander greeted her at the dock, his casual tweed suit a rare departure from formality, a smile genuine as he helped her ashore. "Welcome, Miss Thorne. The estate is modest compared to the city's grandeur, but it offers peace." They toured the property first, strolling paths lined with dogwood trees, the air alive with the buzz of bees and the distant lowing of cattle from tenant farms. Eliza marveled at the blend of worlds, the English rose gardens juxtaposed with American orchards heavy with budding apples, a testament to Alexander's bridging heritage. Over luncheon in the sunlit conservatory, where glass walls framed views of the river and tables groaned under platters of smoked salmon, fresh salads from the kitchen garden and artisanal breads baked that morning, their conversation deepened. Servants in livery moved discreetly, pouring cider from local presses. Eliza spoke of her aspirations, penning a treatise on women's education, inspired by the settlement house successes, where girls, once illiterate, now read Dickens by lamplight. "It's about agency," she explained, her fork pausing mid-air. "In this land of opportunity, why should half the population be sidelined?" Alexander, leaning forward, shared his evolving views, how his rail investments could fund scholarships, countering the exploitation he had long ignored. Vulnerability crept in. He recounted the carriage accident that orphaned him, the cold boarding schools in England, where emotions were luxuries, forging his armor. "You've reminded me that strength isn't solitude," he said, his voice low. The afternoon led them to the manor's library, a vaulted room with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, Shakespeare beside Whitman, histories of the Revolution mingling with British peerage tomes. Sunlight slanted through leaded windows, dust motes dancing as they browsed. Discussing Austen, Eliza teased his titled existence. "Darcy's pride mirrors yours, but without the redemption." Laughing, a rare sound from him, Alexander took her hand to show a first edition of Pride and Prejudice, the touch lingering, electric. Time suspended. Outside, a spring shower pattered on the glass, mirroring the storm within him. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a tentative kiss, soft and exploratory, tasting of cider and promise. Eliza pulled back first, eyes wide with a mix of joy and fear. "This changes everything," she whispered. Yet reality intruded swiftly. News of their association leaked through servants' gossip, appearing in the society columns of The Sun as the Duke and the Reformer, an unlikely pair. Back in the city, Alexander faced pushback. At a dinner with investors in a private club on Wall Street, amid leather armchairs and decanters of scotch, they urged caution. "She's no match for your station. Think of the scandals." Eliza, too, contended with judgments. Friends in the suffrage circles praised her boldness, but her mother, in their village home with its creaking stairs and view of Washington Square, worried aloud over tea. A duke is a dream, but dreams shatter on society's rocks. As April's rains swelled the rivers, they met in discreet parks, hands brushing under parasols, building their bond amid the city's renewal. Street cleaners sweeping blossoms from sidewalks, vendors hawking ice cream from pushcarts. Challenges mounted. A rival suitor, an ambitious railroad heir, cornered Alexander at a Mayfair-inspired garden party in Brooklyn Heights, mansions perched on cliffs overlooking the harbor. Whispers of Eliza's radical views threatened alliances. In the heated exchange during a carriage ride through rain-slicked streets, Eliza voiced her doubts. "Your world devours the unconventional." Alexander, gripping the reins, vowed adaptation. Their resilience shone in small acts, joint visits to orphanages, where children's laughter echoed in echoing halls, forging a shared vision. By summer's eve, as fireflies lit the manor's lawns during a private dinner, their connection solidified, testing the waters of love's deeper currents in America's evolving tapestry.